AutoLine After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires, solutions for your journey.
Hey, welcome aboard, everybody. We're going to do another show, right, Gary?
We are indeed.
And let's introduce Allison.
Allison Malek, the founder and CEO of Middle Third, and she will tell us what Middle Third is all about. But first,
Gary's got a question to try.
All right, so basically, I have two questions.
Ooh,
one
twofer.
I was worried about one.
One is fairly easy. One is impossible.
Okay, let's do easy.
Okay, so the easy thing is, 18 years ago today, that would be January 9th, 2007, what product was announced that has transformed everything, including auto? January 9th, 2007.
I'm going to guess the iPhone.
And you would be correct.
Yeah, it was easy. Okay, now let's do impossible.
All right, so President Carter's funeral was today, so this is a political question or a governmental question, not political. It's a governmental question. Okay, so now on September 29th, 1993, the Partnership for a New Generation of Vehicles was announced.
PNGV.
Was announced by the Clinton administration. What program was announced on January 9th, 2002 during the George W. Bush administration?
Oh, wasn't that some hydrogen vehicle
Yeah, they
thing?
switched from electric to hydrogen or improved fuel economy. My old EV1 buddies at GM recounted it to me often, but I can't remember what the program was called.
So while you guys are thinking about this, we just mentioned George W. Bush, and interestingly enough, that on January 8th, so this is the 9th, on January 8th, 1992, his father, as president, on a trade mission to Tokyo, had a very upset stomach in the lap of the Chinese prime minister.
Japanese prime minister.
That's right.
Right. Yeah,
but
anyway, up in his lap.
So back to the. So
I hate when that happens.
So PNGV was succeeded by.
I don't know. We're saying some sort of hydrogen vehicle thing.
Don't know the program name.
It was the Freedom Car Partnership.
Okay. Freedom Car.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Why not? And that was hydrogen?
It was largely focused on fuel cells.
Okay.
So we get some.
We can pat ourselves on the back here. Right. Yeah.
And then that lasted until May 23rd, 2011, when this name is insane. The U.S. Driving Research and Innovation for Vehicle Efficiency and Energy Sustainability, U.S. Drive, was established. But enough about that.
Yes.
Allison.
Yes.
Middle Third, what is it?
So Middle Third is a consultancy that I run, and it really reflects a lot of the experience that I've had over my career. I joke I've been around a lot of blocks, I've done a lot of things, and the thing I am best at this point is translating, capturing that middle third to help people from different industries, different backgrounds understand each other. I started in electrification as an engineer at GM, then had the opportunity to work in corporate venture for GM, then left and co-founded a startup. So I've seen a lot of different ways that this industry works, and felt that middle third was the best way to capture sort of what I can bring to the conversation.
That's great. Hey, I just got back from CES. They were talking so much about autonomous vehicle there. You helped found May Mobility. May Mobility was exhibiting there as well. I'm just curious to get your idea of where autonomous vehicles and robotaxis are going. And I think those are two separate things, really, in the sense that robotaxi can be a stand-up business that you run as a robotaxi. You started with May Mobility. Autonomous vehicles might be something that big OEMs or maybe even smaller ones incorporate into their vehicles. But, GM just pulled the plug on Cruise. We've seen Volkswagen and Ford several years ago pull the plug on their efforts. So let's start with autonomous vehicles. Where do you see it going?
I've been on this kick for a long time that with autonomous vehicles, it all comes down to the business model. And if you look at companies like May Mobility, like Waymo, they've been very focused on the tech, but also the business model. The less sexy headlines, but where we're actually seeing more traction in autonomous technology, mining, middle mile logistics, vehicles that just go from one point to the other. They've got pretty set routes. They can be more controlled, and that it's taking off. It's just the way things operate. Most large scale tractors today are highly automated.
Agricultural tractors.
Yeah. So when we think about agricultural tractors, like it's out there and it's in action, but it's almost because it's like less sexy markets. People don't talk about it as much.
Okay, but okay, so like when Deere came out with their autonomous tractor, I mean, basically it goes.
Really easy autonomy.
So I mean,
so the back and forth, really simplified John Deere autonomy isn't that sexy, but it gets you the miles. But the other thing is business isn't about, the car business, maybe aside, isn't about being sexy. It's about making money. Who's going to pay for it? And that's where I think you're starting to see the reality settle in. Who's going to pay for it? And as somebody that works with lots of startups and spends lots of time thinking about early value propositions, I think that's where the OEMs kind of got ahead of themselves. It's just not being excited about the business model, not the tech. I'm not talking about the tech. I'm literally talking, what is the cost of carrying that fleet? What is the cost of getting the engineering work done to actually put it out in the world? And are the margins there? Transportation is multiple $1 trillion in the global economy. And frankly, the margins stink in most applications. So it's not a good idea to just jump out and like start a business and hope it's going to work. Like really crunching the numbers for those that are getting out of maybe their core business is critical. And I think that's where you're starting to see some of the level setting as people are looking at like, okay, we're going to keep investing in the R&D and then also funding a fleet. Like, how do you keep that on your books? Can you make the margins that you need? Can you deliver the right kind of rides that make money?
But now you're talking two different things. You're talking robotaxis, right? When you're saying a fleet.
Robotaxi, yeah. So robotaxis would definitely be the fleet.
So let's look at some of the examples out there. I'd love to get your feedback on that. Tesla FSD. I mean, they're charging crazy prices for it. The prices come down, but it's I don't know where they stand right now. $7,000, $8,000
I think it's
a
about
year.
8,000.
8,000. It was as high as 14,000 to buy, not a year, but for lifetime. Ford and GM with Blue Cruise and Super Cruise, I think they're charging about $2,500, something like that. But there's a willing, ready, able audience. They want to pay for that. Now, I'm sure Tesla's making money on its FSD. I don't know if GM and Ford are, but they seem pretty geeked about it. They see a lot of demand for it. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so when we think about autonomy, the systems that are for sale today are level 2 and, to get SAE wonky, level 2 into level 3. They still need a person. That person still needs to be engaged, at least somewhat in the driving experience. And so that is a driver feature. I see that as a driver feature. It gets great data. So one of the things that Elon has talked about is these vehicles out driving. He's like, I'm getting all of this data. I'm going to have the biggest database, which is great and really useful, but it's still a little bit different than no fooling. I never need a person to take over. That is a more advanced engineering challenge. And so that's where, as GM talked about closing down Cruise, they want to bring the technology in-house because as you think about it as a continuum in terms of development, it's all very similar. But because they still have to have the person engaged, it makes more sense as a feature in a car versus an underlying capability that unlocks a new business model, like a robotaxi fleet.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, if we look at what Ford or General Motors is doing, so basically, when they broke up Argo AI, that was the
Ford VW
thing. They said, okay, we'll bring people in, and the Cruise thing, we'll bring people in. But I mean, is it basically that they're bringing people in, but only to enhance the level 2 plus system versus saying we're going to get to 4 or 5 in a consumer product?
I do not have a crystal ball about their decision making on consumer product, and I have a feeling that timescales and just living through the current, whatever the transition is in terms of powertrains, is going to be really distracting. And I think that's part, like beyond just AV, GM's been pulling out of their partnership in China, out of the battery plant partnership in in Lansing, Michigan, like there's contracting happening. There is absolutely, like, you can see the effort to just focus on the core product, and focusing on the core product necessitates an incremental approach to development. So absolutely, they'll keep working on 2 plus, 4, maybe even in other markets. So GM's and I think Toyota are both invested in a company in China that's doing autonomy. So you'll see maybe more partnerships to help bring that around. But I don't know if level 4 for a consumer product will be like top of the development plan.
What's interesting is, at least in the West, and with the West I throw Japan and Korea in there just for shorthand. The automakers have pretty much given up on trying to do autonomy themselves. It seems to me that they're just deciding we're going to buy it. Meanwhile, in China, you've got a number of automakers who are still charging full speed ahead on developing autonomous technology in-house. What would you do? What do you think is a way to go?
Well, so one of the things I didn't bring up before is that I've also worked a bit in global policy. And the reason in China that I think it makes sense for automakers to be able to continue to do this is there's huge support from the government, both in terms of R&D, but also in terms of creating cities where they're allowed to operate on the roads. Here, like NHTSA still hasn't even figured out their exemption process. It's kind of messy, to put it nicely. Europe's a little bit better. Japan's a little bit better as well. But in China, you've got government support. You've got the ability to operate on public roads. And you have a lot of people buying personal vehicles, but you also have a lot of people that already have the mindset to use shared transportation. And that, as much as we want to say, robotaxis are you in your car by yourself, you might have to share a ride. Like there's the ability to explore the business model. And I think that especially in places where people use more modes than primarily their own vehicle, there's just more space to experiment. Paired with that governance unlock, I think it creates a big opportunity in China that doesn't exist as readily in other places. Japan, you actually do still see a lot of interest. So Toyota is invested in a couple of different companies. They've still got the Woven project. They are an investor in May Mobility, looking to bring, I think May's now operational in Japan. So you see that kind of support. Yes, it is through partnership, but that's much closer than what I think you see with OEMs operating in the US.
So when you say May is operational in Japan, so what is it doing? I mean, is it fixed route or is it random route?
I'm going to claim I'm going to state it's been about 4 years since I've been there, and I have not kept up with all of the press releases, but generally known roads. So one of the things that I've been a firm believer in for autonomy since I started the conversations with Cruise Automation when I was back at GM is on the technical side. It's just a problem of how do you actually create a validatable set. And if you're trying to validate for everything, it's going to take you forever. But if you can simplify, like straight up engineering, how do we reduce the variables? Makes it much easier to go through and validate and put something out safe on the roads. So that's where known roads, speed, you'll see a lot of different companies make claims about, either it's on highway or it's off highway. That's because those types of decisions drive the complexity that they have to validate for.
Two things. We had a guy on the show, this goes back pre-COVID, Brian Reamer from MIT, and he made the prediction then that the automakers were going to lose the Robotaxi and AV war because he said they just don't have pockets deep enough. He says it's going to take a lot of money to get this done, and the tech companies are going to win. And that seems to be happening now, at least in the US. China, different situation for what you mentioned. And then you had like a Mary Barra putting her strategy together, which he announced 3 or 4 years ago. She expected Cruise Automation to generate $50 billion in revenue by the year 2030 with the Robotaxi service. What is your sense? Was that just over optimism, or could that be achieved by maybe a Waymo? That kind of revenue generation.
Yeah. I think it was over optimism to execute that by 2030. I think Waymo could be on the path there in the next 5 years, but it isn't over optimism in the next 10. You have to be able to do key money making routes. They've got to be able to get to and from the airport. They've got to be able to tackle business travel. You've got to be able to tackle, you've got to be able to go into metro, tackle those routes in a way that's economical. And I think that's where these announcements from Waymo, you're starting to see them turn the corner. For Robotaxi as a direct almost replacement of rideshare, you've got to be everywhere to everybody all at once. And that's billions of dollars in R&D because the tech has to work for everybody everywhere all at once. And it's also lots of money into the fleet and the business and all of that, where when we go back to where we started the conversation, if it's a May Mobility, if it's Gatik that's doing the middle mile transportation, it does not have to be tens of billions of dollars to get it done. And that's, I think, what's frustrating to me, of just like the lack of imagination of like, no, let's just focus on what the business model needs to be and go solve that and let that unfold. And in time, it can be $50 billion. But if you're spending $50 billion to make $50 billion, it's probably like the numbers don't number. But if you're spending $10 billion to make $50 billion, like it starts to make sense. But having a bit more sense on that end game is really critical to make sure you're focused on how much you spend to get there.
So you were mentioning earlier about in certain cases, in the GM example, there's contraction because you just can't be doing everything, and there's only so much money to spend. And to get to the point of Waymo, I mean, is it possible that there would be a situation whereby Waymo would do the engineering, Waymo would figure out the technology, and then Waymo could sell the OEMs a autonomous system for their vehicles that the OEM would not have to develop?
I think as long as the OEM agreed not to compete with Waymo's transportation service model, I could definitely see that type of a future playing out, because they've been very clear and have set up their business around transportation service provision. So licensing tech is just more revenue in, as long as they're not creating competitors.
AV skeptics, or especially Robotaxi skeptics, say, you're not going to save any money in this. You're going to take the driver out, and you're going to have somebody remote watching. You're going to have to be able to service these vehicles, get them cleaned every night and that sort of, so you're not going to save any money. What do you think?
Generally, so I am an advisor to a remote monitoring company that is coming out with some big news. I don't know if I'm ahead of or behind it, so I'm not going to say much more. But I've been looking at that space, and usually with remote monitoring, you can get 4 to 5 vehicles to a
with
monitor.
One person, yeah.
Once you're in a good efficiency mode, so you still do get efficiency there. It opens up the workforce to who can participate. So that actually is a benefit. And then when you think about,
i.e., anybody with any kind of physical disability,
anybody with mobility challenges can still do this. Anybody that maybe needs to stay in a place and doesn't have that time to commute, but they have the access to the data, connectivity, things like that, not having to be, oops, I picked up a ride that's making me go 2 hours in one direction, and now I've got to get back. Like, those are challenges that drivers face. Like, cool, I, got the crappy luck of the draw, and now I've got picking up somebody at Detroit Airport and they need to get to Grand Rapids. Like, they're unlikely to get a ride back. So now that's cost on them, where now as a monitor, you don't have to pick up all of that risk in terms of just revenue. So that part of it, I do think that there is opportunity for efficiency. Yes, the vehicles should be cleaned every night, but they should be cleaned every night anyway.
Right.
And how many of us have gotten into a taxi or an Uber or a Lyft or a bus, and it's like, ooh, that didn't happen? So I would actually say that's a good future. It's not going to be software margins, I don't think. Hot take. It's not going to be software margins. I don't think that
i.e. 30-40%.
Yeah, Robotaxi is never going to be 30 to 40% margins, I don't think, because you still have a physical thing that is necessarily expensive is the wrong word, but there's a lot of steel, there's a lot of silicon.
It's expensive, and it depreciates, and it breaks, and there are all these other things that need to be accommodated.
But the basic question is, you think the Robotaxi, taking the driver out, can make this a whole lot more attractive
It,
from a business standpoint. I'm
it
talking.
can create, it can really unlock business models. And even the thing I was really excited about with like May and some of the stuff that Waymo's looking at is giving transportation to people that don't currently have access to it. Like, yes, for those of us who can have a car all to ourselves, this seems silly. Or if we don't want a car, we live in a dense city, or if we can't afford a car or we can't drive a car, again, back to mobility impairments, the amount of unlock that this can create is really exciting. And one of the things that people often forget, we're like, oh yes, my car and driving. Some people sometimes drive for the joy of driving. Sunday drives are there for some people. Most people don't. Most of us are driving to get somewhere, to do something. And so when we realize like the job to be done isn't driving, it's moving, it really starts to unlock all of the different ways you can think about it. So I said, I work with a lot of startups. I started talking with a professor at the University of Michigan who's saying, you don't need to go to the doctor's office to get basic routine checkups done. Let's develop fully outfitted mobile health vans that can come to your neighborhood. Think about how many underserved neighborhoods could all of a sudden have access to much better preventative medicine and the unlock on the economy on that way. And that's where I think autonomy gets me the most excited. Is like, yes, the business of transportation can become more economical, but the unlock that it can actually do for access to other things is where I think we're really going to see higher margins and revenue growth, is figuring that out.
And that's what I saw at CES, autonomy starting to spread to all kinds of other things. So, for example, Oshkosh, the truck maker, is looking at automating airport equipment. So, the little trolleys that, they throw your bags on and haul it out to the plane or back. You don't need a person to do that. It's a known route. They go to known places every single time. The one that I liked was the jetway, that lines up with the plane so you can get on and off it. How many times have all of us pulled into the airport, we're maybe a little bit early, and there's nobody to bring the jetway down? Automate it. Have it autonomous. And it's simple, right? All it's doing is finding exactly where the door is and, moving up towards it. What else did I see? Boats. Brunswick, which is now totally into boats, has an autonomous system that will take your boat into the marina and dock it or take it back out again. Because for a lot of first-time boaters, especially if you got a good, it's scary. And you've got this, I'm talking bigger boats, that are even more complicated. You got this $1 million boat. You don't want to crunch it or crunch somebody else's or run down the dock or something. So I was very impressed at CES to start seeing autonomous technology. Another one, a robot. You plug it in your garage. It's like this 3 or 4 foot tall stanchion. You come in with your electric car and the robot moves over, finds your charge port, opens the door, plugs it in. Because I can't believe this, but I mean, I have had more than a few people tell me they don't want an electric car because what a hassle having to plug it in every day. So again, here's a little bit of autonomy attached to a robot.
Yep, it's finding the job to be done, the pain point that somebody will pay for, and that's where, yeah, I think those are great examples of maybe, we'll see how Robotaxi unfolds, but it's happening around us in other ways, and it's becoming more pervasive. And that unlocks other people's thinking to create more new ideas, which I think is where over the next 5 years, Robotaxi will roll out at its pace, but I think we're going to see a lot more in other aspects of our lives.
So Allison, as you're working with startups that are in the mobility space, what are some of the types of things that they're working on?
Oh man, I'm covering a lot of ground right now. Everything from startups working in heat capture to be able to create more electricity to charge electric vehicles, through trying to help companies that are looking at new form factors, 2-wheelers, 4-wheelers, rural charging. Just got off the phone with a company that's working on vehicle display for high-end vehicles that's also mobile. So covering a lot of ground, but I think what's exciting to me to see is that there are more people curious to enter this space of mobility that maybe I grew up in Michigan. So I grew up under the the glow of the auto industry. But you've got a lot of other people that have different experiences, different passions coming and starting to see real opportunity in either directly in auto or places and spaces around it. That's bringing a lot of excitement here to Michigan that I've been having a lot of fun with.
So are these companies working on hardware or software or somewhere in between? The middle third, as it were.
I end up, because there are not many people who have experience with automotive hardware startups, I end up connected more to those because it's like, oh, we found you. But there's plenty of companies working on software as well. There's a lot of really interesting work going on right now in terms leveraging predictive capabilities to bring more granular information to people that are operating fleets. Honestly, like the most interesting stuff I've been seeing happen right now is targeting fleets of vehicles, because you are not trying to sell to a consumer. Consumers make emotional decisions. Do I like it? Do I think I need it? Fleet's a little bit easier, where it's a slightly more rational decision-making process. We saved you money. We improved your quality, something of that nature. A little bit easier to sell and an easier sales process, in my opinion, when it comes to mobility. So everything from how to manage energy across the fleet, as you think about charging, how to get data about weather. So trucks don't, like whole truck fleets don't have to get grounded just because the next county over has frozen roads. If you're in the county that doesn't, you can still drive. Right now it's done regionally, and they can take it down to like the deeper than a zip code, like down to a couple of meters. And that was one I just talked with yesterday. But it's funny, once you pop your head up and you're in the ecosystem, all sorts of things come to you. Just talked with a mobile vet company today.
To come take care of your pet?
Bring the vet to your house.
Wow.
So you don't have to go to the vet.
Another thing that I ran across at CES, predictive maintenance for fleets, both hardware and software. I talked to ETOS, which is able to monitor fault codes and predict what the next defect on the vehicle is going to be before it happens. And their vision is it catches this for the fleet, arranges for the spare parts or whatever is needed to be shipped to either the fleet or wherever they get their vehicle serviced. So it just pulls in, everybody's ready, boom, 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 it gets done.
That is a great example, and there are a lot of different efforts going on from both hardware and software, and how do we stop downtime? But I think what's exciting there too is a lot of it comes down to safety. If you have a major issue in your vehicle or in your fleet and something breaks and stops working, the ability to prevent that from happening and keep fleets operating safely on the roads that we're all on is really, really exciting. And the ability to then also track back through the supply chain and track things down quickly. Lots of good work going on in there. And that ends up, there's some hardware plays, but a lot of it with what's going on in terms of AI, focusing in on data sets specific to vehicles, specific to different technologies. There's a lot of great application work going on to be able to help identify and surface those things more quickly.
Well, I think Ford Pro, much of what it is doing and much of the revenue it is getting is from things like that, keeping uptime for its vehicles by doing predictive maintenance or alerting people that they need to have their trucks taken care of. And that's
yeah, no, I mean, Ford Pro is growing by leaps and bounds, and their margins are really good, largely because, I mean, they're selling a high margin vehicle, whether it's a van or a truck. But yeah, once you get into fleet maintenance, the margins can be terrific.
Yeah. And I think that's what's exciting to me as we think about sort of the future of the industry, is how everybody is going to chart their own course toward being able to find better margin opportunities, because making cars is low margin. And if the companies need to be able to compete, opportunities like Ford Pro, where you're really focusing on the whole end-to-end business, are really exciting opportunities that I hope to see more automakers take advantage of.
But is this, fleet thinking versus individual consumer thinking, things like predictive maintenance?
Individual consumers can benefit. Typically, you're not seeing a ton of direct activity there because consumers don't always pay attention. And it also requires a different kind of relationship. The OEMs have their relationships with the dealers. If the OEM was to tell you, they already kind of tell you you need an oil change or your tires are low. If to send you to the local place versus to send you to the dealer, there's aspects of the historic business model that start to get a little tricky. And I think for the dealers that have more collaborative relationships with the OEMs, there's absolutely opportunity to take like what Ford Pro's doing and do that with their fleet. And for forward-thinking dealers, I think they're already figuring that out. That is not the whole set of dealers, and that's not the whole set of oil change, tire change places. There's another company that I talked with that is just helping local mechanics show up at your house to be able to do basic maintenance work. So you're seeing people trying to stitch that together, but the business model of car sales in the U.S., there's a lot of policy in the way of how people can innovate, specifically with OEMs and dealer franchises.
Hey, let's take a quick commercial break right now. Shout out to our good friends at Bridgestone.
Performance that shines, even in the rain. That's what really matters. Bridgestone Potenza tires, improved grip in wet conditions.
Allison, you mentioned you early on were working in electrification for vehicles. How do you see that today?
So I started at GM in 2008 working on EV charging. At that time, there were about 35 people in GM working on battery packs and charging power electronics. And now there's like thousands. It's fascinating. So I think it's a really exciting time, but also very nerve-wracking. And that plays in part because not just due to the technology, but how different automakers are looking at what their global market footprint is. If you would have asked me that question 18 months ago, I would have told you it's happening. China is electric. Europe is going that way. The US will have to follow because our automakers are global automakers. We see GM kind of retreating from China. We see a lot of struggles in Europe now. So I think it's going to be an interesting time to watch, because the domestic auto industry could choose to continue to create combustion engine vehicles for the U.S. market and just do that, improve it, doing extended range electric vehicles or the PHEVs, and figuring out how to meet fuel economy requirements with that. If they want to be able to participate in the global industry, they have to electrify, but then it comes down to price point. A lot of the cars coming out of China have a lot of cool technology in them in terms of connectivity, and the price points are just a lot lower. And that's what I think is going to be tough to figure out how and if to compete.
I'm just wondering, when you say, global competition, you mentioned GM pulling back from China. Ford's business in China is not all that great.
No, it's terrible.
General Motors has pulled back pretty much almost all from Europe, with the exception of some.
They're going back in with some EVs.
Boutique sales, let's call them that.
Right.
Ford's business in Europe is really declining.
Their retail side, their
Right.
commercial side,
Right.
Ford
Again,
Pro's
Ford
going
Pro,
off to
yeah,
the-
So given that, if you're a domestic maker, wouldn't ICE strategies make more sense, at least in the medium term, going forward?
In the medium term, given the cards as they sit on the table today, yes. I think it was very funny. I want to say it was like 4 or 5 months ago, I saw an article come up that used the acronym EREV, Extended Range Electric Vehicle. And as an early Volt engineer, I was like, oh man, we are back. We're back. We're back to 08. I think the best path forward, and one that I hope that they choose to take, is to do the combined powertrains. Because what you don't want to have happen is a full focus on only ICE, and then all of a sudden something changes and ICE is not available, your suppliers are no longer really focused on it, so you're not getting innovations there, or policy shifts, and you get caught flat-footed. And that's where I think we'll probably see some hedging, so more focus on EREV, more focus on blended powertrains than just like straight ICE, or at least I would hope, because history is long.
Yeah, but there's a danger in that too. And look, there's no question this industry is going crazy over EREVs right now, because this is, the great hope of the industry that, they know they've got to get beyond pure ICE, but they know that at least in the US, half the car buying public wants nothing to do with EVs. So maybe EREVs, which seem to offer a better solution than PHEVs, are going to go. But the way I see it, batteries are the big hang-up. Batteries and public charging. The public charging thing is getting taken care of. It's improving literally by the day, even though it's got a ways to go. But if you get the cost of the batteries down, boom, this war is over. EV is going to win very, very quickly. And I see a danger for the industry saying, oh, let's go EREV right now. We went all head first into BEVs. We were going to abandon ICE. Now we're going to pivot quickly to hybrids or maybe EREVs. And I could see where in 2-3 years, the cost of batteries comes down, where it's cheaper to make a BEV than an ICE vehicle. Public chargers are there, and you've just put billions into this hybrid technology.
Yeah, the hybrid, you make a good point. Hybrid technology requires its own development. It is its own set of controls and powertrain. At least it keeps their skin in the game on battery tech.
No, I agree. I
keeps
agree.
the skin in the game in terms of power electronics, the transmission, where they would end up spending a lot of money that is sort of money ill spent if you were only doing EREV is in that transmission and being able to have the combined energy system. I think keeping a suite on the table makes sense, because to your point, as battery costs continue to come down, or if Chinese vehicles are able to enter the market through other joint ventures or other investment strategies, they are cheaper than, they are less expensive. Cheap is the wrong word to use. They're less expensive and of quite good quality than a lot of entry-level ICE vehicles in the US market today. So for everybody at the top end of the market that's like, no, I want, my internal combustion engine, very nice vehicle, great. For everybody else that cannot afford a new vehicle today and is looking at terrible fuel economy on a used vehicle, an inexpensive EV doesn't look as scary.
Okay, but Allison, when in our lifetime are we going to see Chinese EVs in the US?
I do not know. I do not have a crystal ball over the next 90 days.
but I mean, pre-Trump administration, we still have the tariffs on the Chinese EVs.
Well, look, Trump has said, if BYD wants to build electric cars in the United States, he would welcome that. Now we'll see what happens, because the Chinese supply chain has got to be part of that for them to maintain their low prices.
Yeah.
And that might be a problem. Trump might say, you can build cars in the U.S., but it's got to all be U.S. sourced or North American sourced content in it.
Right. So there's some reporting that Bloomberg did today that J.P. Morgan visited Detroit, talked to people in the industry, and said, what do you see going on with the next administration? And 3 points this guy makes is that if they curtail the $7,500 consumer tax credit, revoke the California emissions waiver, and relax federal standards for tailpipe pollution and fuel efficiency, suddenly ICE makes a whole lot more sense.
And I believe that's exactly what's going to happen. But
and this whole idea that, the 5 years from now, when we have that great battery, well, we said that 5 years ago, we're still waiting. It's just like, yeah, it's going to come.
It's going to be interesting though, because those things all impact the vehicle sales, but they don't actually look at the reality of how much money has gone into battery plants in red states, just to be perfectly blunt. if the sales start to go down, you start to lose jobs in states who have representative in Washington, D.C. that are currently maybe considering rolling some of those things back, all of a sudden asking for more EVs so they can have their jobs back.
Okay.
And that is a wrinkle that I'm just curious to see
Okay,
if it becomes a big wrinkle.
What if they continue to give the tax incentives to the producers of batteries as they do now? What is it, like $35 per
Kilowatt hour.
Kilowatt hour, right? I mean, that's why you have these big battery plants, not because anybody thought that they're going to sell all that many EVs. It's like, wow, we make money. You know, you don't make money off of making Hemis, right? The government's not giving you, hey, here's some money. So those continue because they need batteries for defense purposes.
Right.
So you don't lose those jobs.
But defense still needs GM
Right.
to be producing
You
vehicles.
need the volume.
You still need the rest of the technology to wrap around it. And the defense case in particular needs domestic capability. So that means the GM, even if it's not a consumer EV, still has to make an EV with their GM. They have a GM defense arm. That's why I
Right.
brought them up as an example.
Right. Which basically has been selling internal combustion engine
Yes.
vehicles
Yes.
to
But if the case is that the battery plants will be kept alive through defense sales.
Yeah, there's not enough volume. That's why I argue, yes, for national defense, the U.S. has got to be able to have its own secure battery supply chain. But it's going to need the auto industry to get the volume, the economies of scale to make that viable. Otherwise, you're going to be paying, $2,000 for a AA battery.
I just look at it from the point of view of, okay, last year in Germany, EV sales dropped by 27.4%. Okay, so here is a highly technical economy that is very much focused on environmental issues, and that is what happened.
Yeah.
In that, and it's just like, so how long can domestic OEMs afford to keep hoping at some point people are going to start buying these in volumes that will make this a business versus, you know what, make a hell of a lot of money on that Silverado.
You do, but
they're going to
I'm
keep
going to come
doing
back.
F-150s and silver.
You solve the battery price problem, and CATL claims it has already done that. It claims that you can do EVs in China, build them at lower cost than ICE vehicles. They claim they're there. So I believe them. I actually do. And to me, that's the whole thing. Once you cross that price point where an EV powertrain is cheaper than an ICE powertrain, I mean, then I think you're going to see a lot more people come into the market, and especially once they start to see, oh, there's a charging station there, there's a charging station there, or I've got an app that will tell me exactly where I got to go if I'm on the road. Otherwise, I'm charging at home. I think you're going to see the market for EVs pick up considerably.
5 years will.
No, look, I've been
I
saying all along,
I think
2027.
kind of like if you look at solar, the support or lack of support for solar in the U.S., we've been kind of all over the map. But the investments that were made in China in solar capacity and innovations drove the cost down such that now, like, solar's taking off here, regardless. There are some domestic manufacturers, not as many, and I think that we're going to see, to your point, something similar happen where there will be continued innovation elsewhere that eventually it will be something that cannot be ignored. Because right now, like, we're talking about vehicles that generally the starting price is $40,000 to $50,000. The used car market right now is awful. The repo market right now is awful. Like, the economics of car ownership are not working for people. And so if you can have a $25,000 car or cheaper that you can charge at home for a third of what you're paying in gas right now, that changes things dramatically. I feel like people are kind of talking about how many people are upside down in their car payments right now, but it's a big problem. And as you think about the economics of car ownership, it doesn't make any sense. It truly does not make any sense. And if we can get closer to something that makes sense because it's that cheap, people will pull. People are figuring out how to go sideways to get TikTok and keep TikTok with the pending potential inability to use it. We'll see what the Supreme Court decides and how things shake out in the next 90 days. But people will figure it out once they have access, once they see that it's a thing and that it's at a price point that they can afford. Like, we're not going to be able to stop it. And I think that's what we have to remember is the consumer will find out at some point that they're being hoodwinked into a more expensive product that they don't have to have. Maybe it's not 5 years, maybe it's 10 years. But if that's what happens, the domestic automakers will become defense contractors, maybe, but they won't have a bigger business.
But you said earlier that consumers buy from the heart more than from the brain, right? So when you talk about a cheaper vehicle, I don't think most people want to buy cheaper or less expensive products. I mean, there are less expensive products, and they would opt for buying something that is more deluxe, whether they can afford it or not. It's not rational.
That's very true. But if you look at some of the vehicles that are coming out of the Chinese auto market right now, they have more capability built into the vehicle at a lower price point than you can get in a $40,000 car in the US.
But what causes that to happen? I mean, it's just like, I don't see how we can translate that here into this market, like suddenly, like
it's not going to be sudden. I think you're going to have a lot of people getting exposure in other places and start, like, the internet is a problem in this case. Seeing more of it, learning about more of it is going to create a pull and a question of, like, why can't I have that too? Why do I have to pay $50,000 to get a car that has all the connectivity that I want, the active safety that I want, the powertrain that I want, when I could get it for cheaper, like in another place that is a different design? To your point, it's a fundamentally different cost structure. I don't think that some of that will probably come from the high end, where people are traveling to those places and experiencing those things. It may start there, but you can't hold that back from people forever.
But here's the other thing. There's a lot that the West can learn from China. And everybody says, oh, they're all subsidized and, we'll never be able to compete with that. They are subsidized, no question about it. But, there's some really good case studies that we should be looking at. I was talking to one supplier that did business with a Chinese automaker. And they said, we got this thing done in 18 months. It was like, it went bang, bang, boom. And from scratch to full delivery. And they said, as we look back on what was going on, a typical traditional automaker gives us 4,000 specifications that we have to meet. The Chinese company gave us 400. What the Chinese are far better at doing, working with their suppliers, is saying, here's what we want it to do. You go figure out how to make it happen at this price point. Another thing, the Chinese use far more right off the shelf componentry, simple componentry, not the high-tech stuff. It can be anything from door hinges to tire pressure monitoring systems to windshield wiper actuators. Just buy what's already there. No need to redesign it. No need to have to validate it, source it, none of that stuff. You just buy it, put it on your car. Now you're shrinking your product development time. And as we go to more software-defined vehicles, as we go to them, I shouldn't say go more to, everyone's going in that direction. Now, all of a sudden, you can do a whole lot more of the stuff that the Chinese offer on their cars, because they're getting there a whole lot faster than Western companies are, with the exception of Tesla, which kind of invented all this stuff, by the way. So, yeah, we don't need to just blame subsidies to try to explain why the Chinese are doing so well. They're just operating the good ones. There's crappy Chinese companies, right? And there's traditional Chinese or state-owned ones that don't move nearly as fast. But the good ones, the BYDs, the Neos, the Li Autos, the Great Walls, these guys are moving really fast, and they're doing things differently. They're running their operations differently. And if we start doing those things, we're going to see our costs go down.
So all of the companies that you mentioned, including Tesla, is basically a child in the age.
They're startups.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So, we've got over 100 years of people doing it a certain way. So, Allison, you worked at one of these companies. what likelihood is there that there would be a sufficient number of people within an existing organization that has been doing things for this very long would suddenly say, yeah, you know what, we can buy the door hinges off the shelf. We can we can go to Home Depot and get those fasteners. I mean, it's just, I mean, you
I laugh out loud because I've been a part of those conversations of like, nope, we got to re-engineer it ourselves. But that was also 15 years ago. And I think to the point that you made earlier, or like the emphasis that you were making earlier, this is a moment of existential decision making. This isn't a moment in the industry of, do we add fins to our vehicle or not? This is, how do we continue to exist? And for those leaders who acknowledge we are in existential decision making, it can become much clearer, much more quickly, what needs to fall away and what needs to be, what good needs to be carried forward and what needs to fall away. I think where I struggle is that having a domestic protected industry could create the sense that it's not a moment of existential decision making. And that's where I'm not sure. It
Totally
depends
agree.
on how many leaders.
And that's the danger of tariffs, is that you put up the wall and it's like, hey, we got it easy breezy here.
We're
going
to have great Trabants.
Yeah,
it's going to be awesome.
Right.
You're going to love your 3-cylinder.
That's why I would love Trump or whomever to announce, look, starting in 2030, we're going to start to phase out the tariffs 10 percentage points a year. By 2040, they're gone. So you got from now to 2040 to figure out how to get your operations in order.
Okay, but to go back to your point about people finding out about these expensive, loaded, capable vehicles that are costing a fraction of what they can get the same sort of capabilities in a vehicle here, 10 years will be too damn long. People are not going to sit around and say, oh, in 2040 we'll get that. It'll be just like them.
But here's the reality. So, I mean, there was a number of us in the very early 80s that really got to know the Toyota production system. Start talking about it. There was all kinds of consultants, Harbor and Associates especially, preaching it. It took over a decade before the industry really absorbed those lessons and started to apply them. Now, once it did, they were off to the races. All of a sudden, the U.S. auto industry pretty much matched the Japanese auto industry in efficiency and quality. I just think the reality is it's going to take a decade.
Did they have a decade?
Maybe not.
Don't have a crystal ball, not going to make those claims.
But let's just say the possibility is they do not have a decade. That's a very real possibility.
So, Allison, you talk to all kinds of people in the industry, startup people, people in academia. So, I mean, is there the capacity in terms of knowledge, capability, people, everything to make this change happen?
The technology and innovation are here. We have the wrong culture to unlock it. And so one of the projects that I'm working on is actually, I'm not even going to try to fix the automakers, but in the state of Michigan, how do we get more of that talent and capability to stay here and innovate here and let them know that startups are even an option? Because I started as an automotive engineer and I did go co-found a startup. Figuring out that path in Michigan was really hard. It was really hard. There's nobody that's like, oh, here's how you do it. Here's what you need to know about. And even within the automotive industry, information is very siloed. Like interiors people don't talk to powertrain people. We work on two totally different things. It's all auto. Where if you go to other innovation ecosystems, you could be an auto person talking to a medical device person, startup, corporation. It doesn't matter. I want to get more of that happening here so that way when the industry is ready, we've got more of that talent that has learned how to move quickly, how to deal with the ambiguity that comes from not knowing. I know I have to hit this goal. I'm not sure what goal comes after that, but we'll figure that out when we get there. That's what you learn when you're in a startup. You learn to get comfortable with that, but also to get excited about it. And so that's what I'm really excited about right now with the Changing Lanes program, is to try to help keep grow more of that culture here. I'm going to try to do it on the inside, and then, they can go pick people off and we can continue the great rotation of talent that happens here. But it does not happen as it is status quo.
So I would rephrase what you're doing. Let me tell you what you're doing.
I love it. No, I got to know how to pitch it better.
So you are not getting a new generation of entrepreneurs and an entrepreneurial spirit revived in Michigan. Because remember, if you go back 100, 120 years ago, this was Silicon Valley of the United States. This was where all the innovation was happening. We've let that fritter away through consolidation. We had these big behemoths called the big three. What you are really doing is creating a new culture and group of people so that the state of Michigan has something when the traditionals fall and collapse. Because I don't think they're going to be around to
Very
say,
optimistic.
Hey.
I mean, he's saying what I think in my head and I don't say out loud.
Right.
I was one of the last people to hire into GM full time before they went bankrupt. I watched the tech center roads lined with SUVs to take people home. That was extremely impactful. That was like my first 6 months of being a professional in the world. Watching that and seeing what happened to all the communities, not even just my coworkers, but the communities, was really formative. And so as I look at what happened in 2008, and I'm like, we had over 6,000 layoffs in the across the OEMs and the suppliers in the state just last year. Normal course of business, just booming year for GM, 6,000 layoffs. Where are those people going to go when the whole industry is collapsing? And that's good talent. That's good talent, great experience. And so the aim really is, how do we create a place to land for those that think they want, startups aren't for everybody, I'll admit that, but think they might want it. How do we create a welcome mat? How do we make it really easy to learn about? A lot of even the young people that I talk to are like, oh, I have to go to California to do that. I'm like, no, you can do it here. Stay here, please, stay here. Let me help. I'll introduce you to people. You can do it here. You can found your own company or you can join a company. How do we just make it easier to learn about those opportunities so that way, as this great talent, these people aren't getting let go because they're poor performers. They're getting let go because of changing business conditions. So how do we redeploy them, keep them here, and grow other opportunities is really, as you can tell, what I'm very excited about.
No, look, what you're doing is awesome, and it's absolutely what's needed. And I would say, look at what's going on in Germany right now. Because to me, I keep saying, Germany and Europe in general is the canary in the coal mine. Volkswagen's, you talk about 6,000 getting laid off at GM, Volkswagen's talking about 35,000. And that's going to ripple through the supplier community. That's just Volkswagen alone, 35,000. Bosch is talking 10,000, Conti's talking 10,000, and so on down the line. And that's going to happen here. So I love what you're doing. This is getting us ready for the existential, paradigm shift that I see coming to this industry. Not coming. It's here now. It's
here
just
in
at the early phases.
And it's how do we take that talent and redeploy it? Because I think what's different than 2008 as of right now, which is great, is the rest of everything is in recession. So there is the ability. There's tons of investment going on right now in manufacturing technology. You've got tons of startups starting in California in manufacturing. We know how to do that here. And we know how to innovate on it here. We just need to talk about it better. And so these are the things where it's as much as it's the existential issues for the industry that we saw in 2008, it's not the broader economy. So I think this is really a unique time to be able to capitalize and inspire more of that innovation.
Good. And that's probably the perfect point.
To do one shout out though.
Do.
For those of you who think you can't do it here or don't know of a story, we're doing fireside chat. So I'd like to welcome you January 15th at Tech Town in Detroit, January 22nd at OU Inc. up in Auburn Hills at Oakland University. We want to get the word out and just help make it seem less foreign and less uninviting. So if this sounded interesting, you are welcome. Please come. I will make sure you guys get the links for your show notes.
And just let me add on to what you're saying. We're here in Michigan. We're talking about stuff in Michigan. These lessons can be applied. I mean, we've got audience in Germany. We've got audience all around the world. So don't just take this as a Michigan thing. Listen to the lessons being discussed here. Take it to your community because I'll bet a bunch of people are sitting in places listening to the show right now or watching it thinking, geez, they're doing that in Michigan. You can start doing it in your community too.
Exactly.
Real good. Allison, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you guys so much for having me. This was awesome.
Great. And Gary, I'll see you again next week.
Indeed.
And hopefully we'll see all of you.
AutoLine After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires, solutions for your journey.